Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, afternoon, and evening to our global audience today. Welcome to Device Authority's latest webinar with special guests Thales eSecurity. My name is Rosa Lenders, and I am pleased to introduce our speakers for today, Adam Eriksson and John Grimm. Adam has over 20 years' experience working for enterprise software companies, building out markets in employee provisioning, encryption, secure credentialing, and IoT solutions. He is currently Vice President of Business Development for Device Authority and is responsible for our strategic channel relationships. John Grimm is responsible for security strategy at Thales eSecurity, with a focus on the Internet of Things. His 25 years of experience started as a systems and firmware engineer, building secure cryptographic key distribution systems for the US government. And over the years, he's progressed through product management, solution development, and marketing strategy leadership roles. He received his bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from Worcester Polytechnic Institute in Massachusetts, and is a member of Tau Beta Pi, the Engineering Honor Society. We expect the webinar to last approximately an hour, and we hope you can stay until the end to hear about some great offers available to help accelerate your IoT projects. You'll be able to submit questions via the question window in the GoToWebinar control panel throughout the session. We will try and answer as many questions as possible at the end of the webinar. A recording of the webinar will be made available tomorrow on the Device Authority website, and everyone who registered will be emailed the link. I shall now hand over to our speakers.
All right, thank you, Rosa. This is Adam Eriksson from Device Authority. John, thanks for joining us today. Looking forward to this session to get into some of the details specifically with regards to the HSMs and IoT and what KeyScaler and from Device Authority and Thales are doing together on the integration side for our customers. Overall, the global objectives for today that we'd like to be able to get into is really get a basic understanding of that IoT device root of trust and what that means within various industries, what that means within various technologies, and why it's absolutely critical. We're also going to start describing identity and access management for IoT as it's different than IAM in the traditional enterprise. Then we really want to dive down and say, if you're doing an IoT project and you're going to be using certificates for identity and integrity, why building in an HSM is critical for that, not just for common sense and for security, but there's also regulatory compliance in various industries that are affecting that. Device Authority, we are an enterprise software company specifically designed to solve the issues of the IoT identity access management market. We're currently on version 5.8 of our KeyScaler software platform, which has matured throughout the years to incorporate more features and become more robust, especially with regards to integration with the Thales HSM line. Our background was developing intellectual property for device identity and data privacy, specifically within an M2M world where you have borderless, headless devices. There is no multi-factor authentication, and once the devices are deployed out the field, it's very difficult to upgrade their security, unlike buying a laptop and be able to put an antivirus software on it afterwards. Our route to market, like most software startups, has been interesting. It's been dynamic. Painful at times, but it's led to a deep understanding of the IoT market as its inception and where it's at today. And what that has provided for us as Device Authority is a robust ecosystem of partners, because what we found is the IoT is no simple solution such as throwing a SIM card into a gateway. We have partners in the Silicon world, such as Intel, where we're a part of their secure device onboarding program at the chip level. We have the OEMs and ODMs that build out gateways and other devices. We work with the HSM vendors, such as Thales, and the CAs, both public and private CAs. We also integrate with the application enablement platforms, of which there seemingly 10 cropping up every new week as folks are trying to figure out the best way to onboard devices and to work with the data streams. We work with the cloud vendors such as AWS IoT, Microsoft Azure, and others, because that's another component. And finally, we have system integration partners that are actively involved in building out IoT solutions for their customers. So through all of that, it's provided us at Device Authority not only a good perspective on the market and who is doing what, but it's also led to a lot of new feature development in our software platform. So we're excited to be able to talk about that today. So John, I will let you.
Thanks so much, Adam, and appreciate you and Device Authority welcoming us on to the webinar today. So quickly, how we fit in, an introduction of the parent company, Thales Group, if you're not familiar with that, is a multi-billion-dollar global company with several major business lines, things like defense, aerospace, transportation. One of those major lines is cybersecurity, and Thales eSecurity is a part of that cybersecurity line. We are specialists in applied cryptography, have been in the business of crypto in one way, shape, or form for over 40 years now. Thales eSecurity's products can best and most simply be separated into some hardware pieces and some software pieces. Of the hardware pieces, we'll spend some time today talking about the nShield hardware security module product line. That's a product that is used by many different providers of security applications to lock down that application or provide extra security around the crypto components that might be done, whether those be encryption or signing. And we'll talk about that more as we go. We also have a payments hardware security module line, which is a long-time provider of secure transactions between merchants, acquirers, and issuers, and also doing some of the more interesting and latest stuff around point-to-point encryption and payment card credential issuing for mobile devices and the like. There's also pictured there the Data Cryptor network encryption line, which is a bump in the line, point-to-point, super high speed, super low latency product if you need to move a lot of data fast between one place and another. And then finally, on the upper right of the hardware portion is the Vormetric Data Security Manager. Those of you familiar with Thales eSecurity may remember a couple of years ago, we brought the Vormetric company into Thales, and along with it came a very impressive line of encryption, tokenization, and cloud capabilities on the software side of things. So the Vormetric portfolio has been a great addition to allow us to help customers solve data protection issues, whether they be in enterprise in the cloud, and also gain firmer control of their encryption processes by being able to do things like control an encryption key, but perhaps delegate an encryption workload into the cloud. So that's a brief overview of where Thales is and what we do.
Well, John, you and I have spoken about this many times, and the standard opening line of any IoT conference is, what does IoT mean to who and to what? And recently this week I was at a Microsoft IoT event in San Francisco, and of course that was one of the fabled storylines that they were talking about, trying to discuss who understands what about IoT, and specifically what does a business understand of what it's trying to achieve with IoT aside from a research project. So I think looking at some of these things, from Device Authority angle, to use an analogy, we look at data as kind of being the new oil, and analytics being the refinery for the oil. And ultimately, you're not just mining the data to get to the data. You want an actionable item to use, at the back end that's going to drive business value. And within that whole structure, there are multiple components, and again, multiple vendors that get involved, which adds to more complexity, more cost from time to time. But I think there are some standard building blocks within that. And so, John, knowing that Thales has a long list of customers in various industries, what percent of your customers are currently evaluating IoT projects, IoT outcomes, and they're coming back to Thales asking for some insight on security?
Well, it's really interesting, Adam, because as you alluded to, IoT projects can take a lot of different shapes and forms. And what we're finding is that folks are starting to tackle the bits that mean the most to them. So, IoT projects, they might be internally focused as far as improving some process or optimizing some process, like a lot of manufacturers are looking to talk about now. They also might be externally focused around things like customer satisfaction or driving more revenue. A lot of retailing customers, for example, are trying to find a way to duplicate the online experience in physical stores and use the IoT to help facilitate that. And then you've got some other industries like the insurance industry where everybody's got something to gain. If an insurance company can personalize a policy to you, you're paying for what you need as opposed to paying across an average of people in your demographic. Likewise, by doing that personalization, you are probably less likely to go hop for a lower cost solution and change providers. So that personalization can really be a win-win on each side. But regardless of all that, I think in particular we're seeing a lot of the process-driven areas start to move a little faster. Folks on the internal efficiency side, so in the manufacturing and industrial sector, for example, a higher percentage of those looking to say, look, how can we build into our process a way that we can trust the data that's going on? A lot of manufacturers have been collecting data off of their manufacturing lines for quite some time. But the difference now is that they're looking to, instead of those being closed systems where the connectivity is very limited inside the plant and on a more proprietary type of setup, now they're looking to extract that data and look at it from a broader lens and maybe collect operational data from a number of sites and use that to compare and contrast. That all falls apart if you can't trust the data in the first place. If you solve all the problems of connectivity and interoperability and are able to collect data, get them to the point of analysis, and try to get some meaningful outcome or out of analyzing the data, none of it means a thing if you really can't trust those devices and you can't trust the data that's coming off those devices. And that's what we're kind of showing here. It's that old principle of garbage in, garbage out. As folks tackle issues around the IoT, the two that are always coming up on the top of the list are interoperability and connectivity, again, because of the diversity of devices and the different history of the types of devices that folks are looking to connect, and security. Those two tend to be at the top of the list, whether you're reading industry sources or if you're talking to customers. And many are using pilots right now to try to shake some of that out and get their feet wet with what some of those issues are and how they might start to address them. We've certainly gotten a strong indication that PKI, with trusted crypto sitting behind it, is going to be a core piece of that solution, and we'll get into that more as we go through the presentation. But what we want to talk about here is how some of the strategies for how folks can turn security and trust from that barrier that it's seen at today into an enabler.
Well, I think, to echo some of those things, within the IoT realm, it's not just someone hacking an email. It's economics. It's the safety issue. There's a lot of different components. And as I go out and talk to people, right, we bring up the word trust, and it's still amazing to me today that people have so much trust in devices when those devices are critical to their lives, yet they don't have a verifiable way to trust that device. So I think that's what we want to get into, talking about time to value for IoT deployments, et cetera. But that also leads back into the regulation stance. So within the Thales customer sets, what are the regulatory issues that you're getting hit with questions where folks are looking for answers?
Well, we've seen very clear evidence that the regulatory environment is getting a little bit more rigorous. Certainly with GDPR starting to approach, we see more people looking and paying closer attention. Certainly in the healthcare realm, there's always been sensitivity to privacy and confidentiality of data, but an increased concern, especially when you look at both across the consumer realm with personal devices that are connecting things about you, and then in a care setting as well, wanting to have good privacy protection, but also not get in the way of actually delivering care. I think a lot of those factors are contributing to a higher level of rigor and folks looking a lot closer at the strategies for how they're going to establish trust from the start.
Well, that we're seeing a lot of the similarities of our customer sets coming to us, and either calling out specifically GDPR, or looking how to build in security functionality to protect against future regulation as they see it coming down the pike. And again, the edge devices are of a critical nature these days, from the automotive use case through the blood pressure monitors that we've seen, and all of those things. We obviously preach that it's a lot less costly to build in security proactively rather than reactively, especially when you're looking at deployments in the tens of thousands, if not the millions of devices out there. And I often use that Austrian hotel that they had their electronic locks hacked and held for ransomware, and that's kind of a mild ransomware case. But when we start getting into true device trust and data trust, there are far more serious implications, especially as ransomware is cropping up. And we use the example of you have within a corporate office building a fire suppression system, and that fire suppression system is talking back to the control, and it's always pinging off with various temperatures. And if for a year every day the temperature in a room is 72 degrees and all is copacetic, what if one day it spikes to 180? Do you automatically then trigger that fire control system to douse the entire building, or do you want to validate that device has not been tampered with before you actually do that? And I think those are some of the things that are just now cropping up, where hackers and other villains in the world are understanding how to hack into these things, and what is going to do the most damage, or what is going to raise the most Bitcoin in their own wallets for that. And so, John, I know for Thales, this is the bread and butter, talking about security across these things, and the ever increasing threat reports. I believe you just released a new report on data protection, correct?
That's right, and yeah, and I would echo a lot of that. It's not just the number of devices, but it's the diversity of the devices and their history that is really a vexing challenge for folks that don't just have a homogeneous environment or a highly controlled environment. And two, you have to look beyond just the actual function of the device itself, which in a lot of ways might be very innocuous, but because of the poor security design, or in a lot of cases lack of security design, the ability to use that device as an entry point to the network, for example, the internet connected appliance in the break room in the company, you might not think of a threat to its function to brew some more coffee or turn on the dishwasher, but you sure might care if it can be the point of entry that somebody can then use to move laterally and go finding something more interesting. And that lack of security by design is a problem there, particularly too. I think there's pretty good publicity around the dangers of devices that ship with admin credentials and don't require you to change them, for example. But another one that we see quite a bit is the configuration control and the integrity of the device itself. What is in place for that device to know that it's getting an authentic software load, and to know that any updates or patches that are coming down are from an authentic source that haven't been tampered with, because that's the route for ransomware, as you were talking about, or malware. The security around the software configuration is not something that is typically very mature in a lot of the cases that we've seen. So part of your injection of a trust into a system like this needs to not only look at the ability to identify and authenticate the device in an appropriately strong way, but also to manage that software load going forward. We saw with the Mirai botnet, over a year ago now, the leveraging of consumer devices and things like that to send denial of service attacks didn't have a big effect on a lot of consumers. Maybe their devices were used to ping these DOS attacks, or maybe they were affected by some of the outages that came around because of it. but it wasn't like the attack was turned against them. And so we continue to see that on the consumer side, folks are still buying for glitzy features and fancy things in the IoT and not necessarily as concerned about security. But when you look at what's happened over the last year now, where there are vulnerabilities found in some of these core components, they aren't specific to a particular manufacturer, like a remote hack of a Jeep, a specific car or a specific instance. Now we're seeing things like this CAN bus vulnerability that's shown on here. So flaws in the inherent operation of how a CAN bus works on an automobile are to stop listening if a particular component sends too many error messages. And this vulnerability is one that is against the replay of an error message to effectively shut off safety systems on the car, maybe the ABS, the braking systems, or any number of safety systems that are on the car. And this is something that is inherent to how the thing actually works. And this trend is one that we worry about a little bit, because it's what are those lurking vulnerabilities? Because over the last year, we've seen broader vulnerabilities start to come to light that have been sitting there but not exploited.
Well, and I think one of the things that we've all noticed is the industry is trying to grapple with is there a magical technology out there to help create device trust and data trust? And it's well known that PKI was designed to solve those issues, and that PKI is an accepted standard. The issue with PKI is how do you effectively manage it, especially trying to do it at scale. And that's part of what we're going to be discussing today is, using Device Authority KeyScaler, providing automated, PKI certificate management for IoT at scale as per security policy, we believe eliminates a lot of the problems with that. But John, you can speak to this report that Thales and the Ponemon group came out with and kind of describe the findings and who's trying to do what in the enterprise with PKI.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, we've certainly seen over the years the top use case for our nShield hardware security modules over the year has been with PKIs, specifically securing the root keys and the issuing certificate authority keys. And one thing that we look at every year with the Ponemon Institute is what are people doing with their PKIs? How are they changing? PKI's been around for a long time, since the 90s when it kind of first came out, and it's quietly been perking along ever since. And one of the most interesting findings is that over the years, people have started to layer more and more applications into drawing certificates from their PKI. So it may have been fielded 10 or 12 years ago to support internal SSL certs or a VPN or email product. But on average now, folks are hanging 8, 9, 10, 11 different applications off their PKI. And a lot of times the PKI wasn't necessarily built for that in the first place. The interesting thing, very related to this discussion we're having here, is that over the years and through this survey and through what we've done with our customers, we've seen this shoring up of security around PKI because of the increased dependence. Now instead of 2 applications depending on it, you have 8, 9, or 10. We've seen the use of longer RSA keys, going from 1024 to 2048. We've seen the updated hashing algorithms from MD5 to SHA-1 and now SHA-2. We see people starting to use elliptic curve crypto, particularly for IoT applications because of its smaller footprint, smaller key length, but same level of security. So because of that investment in their PKI, what we see now is the very clear interest, and this is something that we've poked at more in the last couple of years in that survey, of leveraging the enterprise PKI for their IoT deployment. And in fact, a large number of folks in the survey indicated they plan to use their enterprise PKI for IoT. And IoT is one of the things that's really caused them to take another look at their PKI and see if the technology, the policies, the procedures, and everything else is up to snuff. Now, eventually, some of those might, if they get to super high volumes in the future, might also leverage a partial cloud model. But the clear indicators are in the early going that that enterprise PKI that has gotten that investment and it's gotten shored up from a security perspective is very likely going to be leveraged for the IoT deployments.
So with that being said, John, and we've tossed around the term HSM, why don't you kind of describe what it is and what it does and how it fits into the universe there?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, hardware security modules, basically anywhere you're doing cryptography, whether you're doing encryption or digital signatures, if you need to do that in a very secure way, in a place that's segregated from your application server environment, and you need the highest levels of security for key generation and for key protection associated with that, that's where a hardware security module can come in. Yeah, the example I gave earlier of a PKI, anywhere you have extremely high value keys that you need to protect, to generate and protect, one of the things that HSM does really well, it has really good random number generators, and probably folks on the call realize that's where really good encryption keys come from, as random as possible of a source. HSMs are only good when you have an application that they're supporting. So in other words, whether it be a PKI application, a VPN application, email, an SSL application delivery controller, a privileged access manager, anything that has some form of crypto associated with it, by offloading that to an HSM, you can achieve a high degree of security. And for folks that need to comply with various regulations and show that they're using an enhanced level of security around their crypto, that's where an HSM can come into play. So that's where they bring the most value. The piece of value that doesn't get as much press, though, that's really an important piece, is the policy over key use. So really controlling, to a great degree, if there is a call for crypto from an application, to make sure that all the conditions have been met that allow that particular action to happen, all the approvals, whether they're automated or manual, making sure that folks that are involved in any processes are properly authenticated. So locking down crypto processes in a way that's validated through standards like FIPS is the place where an HSM comes into play.
And obviously, as we alluded to earlier, we're really talking about device trust. How do I know that device is the device I deployed? And if I have device trust, then that enables the data trust. So obviously, we're definite proponents of hardening the crypto for IoT. And as you note here in your slide, John, it's not just a hardware root of trust, but it goes back to code signing, and as you just mentioned, the policy management over those keys. And so I think, as looking at a holistic deployment, as we often do, for device authority, we see how do you manage all of this trust at scale. And it goes back to the fundamentals of device trust, which includes both identity and integrity, the data trust, which is more security and privacy, and then how do you operationalize that trust at IoT scale? So in this graphic here, as we see, and whether someone says it's 20 billion devices or 50 billion devices, even if it's 2 billion devices, it's still a huge number to manage. And ultimately, and John, I think this is where we're also looking for some insight from Thales is, for device authority, we've been very focused on manufacturers who are building connected products and dealing with certain industrial systems that are on the factory floor. But ultimately, what customers are looking to do today is tie that back into their existing enterprise crypto policies, and doing that enterprise data trust, flowing back and forth with the IoT trust, and that's all goes back to what is your hardware root of trust that you're using there to validate all that data integrity and privacy, regardless of where it's flowing and how it's flowing.
That's right, and I think the very strong message is, those that have invested in creating a structure that helps establish that trust for other applications in the enterprise are very happy and desire to leverage that trust into an application. Your breakout is perfect too. The way that KeyScaler can help you both as a manufacturer of a device, or if you're just a user of the device operationally. I think a lot of people lose track. You get excited about, yeah, we need to get that root of trust into the device, and then we can build from there. But that whole aspect of lifecycle management is actually the trickier part. And managing devices through the process of either rekeying or getting new certificates or going offline and coming back on. That ongoing management piece is the piece that a lot of folks are used to dealing with from the PKI standpoint and managing certificates. They can leverage that same operational expertise now for their IoT devices by drawing off the same trusted setup that they have in their enterprise PKI.
And for us, again, looking at that starting point of a manufacturer that is attempting to establish some base level security and use certs on their devices. I know later on we'll get to a manufacturing use case for Thales, but this is where we see, that's immediate root of trust that can be injected. And then as the device goes through its life cycle, its channel stages, eventually it's going to have to interoperate with different application platforms that are going to consume the data. So how do you automatically then transfer or integrate that device trust with that application? For instance, with AWS IoT, they require a certificate on a device to provision and to actually do their billing management. But how do you establish that within a corporate security posture and framework and make that root of trust yours and not just the manufacturer's? And so going down, as we keep mentioning on the operational side of the house, this is where the combination of the Thales HSM line and the KeyScaler platform help automate that as per security policy, manage it at scale, which is critical in an automated fashion, so it becomes far more efficient. Because it's one thing when it's a pain that a website can't be accessed because its certificate was revoked or expired. It's another thing when all of a sudden you have avionics equipment that have certificates expiring and no one's been keeping track of those. So as John mentioned, the IoT device lifecycle management has to be taken into consideration by various players in the industry, going back to the ecosystem that we discussed earlier.
And I think too, Adam, if I could add, one of the particular aspects of lifecycle management that folks are batting around right now with relation to certificates is revocation, especially if they have components that aren't connected all the time. Revocation has been a particularly thorny issue for folks dealing with PKI over the years. In the IoT, we hear a lot more thought of shorter-lived certificates. In fact, so short that you can almost take revocation out of the picture and just let certificates naturally expire rather than having to revoke them. But by doing that, now you've got to have a much higher scale system for issuing certificates and perhaps issuing batches of certificates that devices can cycle through. So those are the types of things, by being able to automate policy and the things that KeyScaler can do, that's the way that you can achieve that uniformity of policy and controls that you need, backed by that secure system that can create the credentials securely in the first place.
Well, once again, as our path to market evolved, we began to realize that there is becoming an enterprise IoT security solution blueprint. Once again, delving back into the requirement for the device trust and the data trust. And so as we see kind of the spectrum out there, which once again demands that, from a device authority angle, we need an ecosystem of partners, because there are 4 basic steps. The first one that we see is installing and injecting the root key at the time of manufacture, which is the far left of the slide there. The second is the secure device onboarding, and some call it zero-touch provisioning. Intel, once again, has been doing this with their secure device onboarding project. Microsoft is including it in design plans for their DPS. So different folks are trying to take a look at this as the next kind of wave that's going to be required, to build out the scale of, once again, whether it's 20 billion or 50 billion devices that are out there. The third step is going back then into the provisioning and managing of owner-controlled security for devices. I know, dealing with a lot of smart city projects, if I'm buying equipment from 10 different vendors and each vendor has their own security posture on the device and they don't let me take it over, how could I possibly ensure the security of my citizenry when I don't control the security and the trust of the devices? And so that's the control factor, being able to switch that over and again do it in an automated way, which once again, various customers are going to use a public CA. Various customers might use the embedded CA in Azure or AWS. but others are going to require the higher assurance of a FIPS 140-2 device, like the Thales nShield product. And then finally, it's that step four. It's the enterprise integration. How am I managing my encryption policy, not just from my IoT devices, but from everything else? And as John had mentioned, specifically within the Thales world, with their Vormetric product, doing data security at every step of the way and controlling who has access to what. So, looking at a security blueprint, what we're trying to get across is, as folks are looking at the lay of the land for what they're attempting to do, let's all understand the different pieces and components and understand what the solutions can be, because, as we said earlier, there are no standard IoT deployments, but there are standard IoT building blocks that can be assembled to reach the outcome that is required out there. So, John, how do you like this view of the world?
I think you really hit the nail on the head in terms of that flexibility. There are absolutely no two IoT projects that look alike right now, and the standard building block analogy is the perfect setup. What you need to do is have pieces that you can put together to achieve what you need. Every environment is different, risk level is different, the threats, the exposures, the compliance requirements, the type of data that's at play. There are a lot of variables, and projects have varying needs across those. So what you need is flexible pieces to allow you to get a policy together that fits your environment, your risk profile, and what you project over the next couple of years will be your needs, and to build to that. So that taking that building block approach and identifying the data, tearing everything apart, and looking closely at the device level, at the data level, and at the system level, where this is, and how you divide things up between the cloud and the enterprise, it's all part of the equation.
And that's really why we formed the partnership between Device Authority and Thales, is that we believe that initial root of trust has to be as strong as possible for all the benefits that John just mentioned. And then for the Device Authority portion, we're kind of like a glue that holds these four sections together, going back to the ecosystems that we've dealt with, from the silicon to the OEMs, through to the CAs and into the application, enterprise platform providers and the cloud providers. So hopefully, using KeyScaler and deploying it, we can, by automating all of these functions of the IoT device lifecycle management, we can reduce the time to market required by ticking off all of the security requirements for it. So to get into it, now we have the fun portion of this, and that's talking about real world use cases. And while both Thales has customers, in every industry there is, finance, government, healthcare, Device Authority, we've seen a lot of traction in the industrial space and healthcare space. And so the use cases we're going to briefly go over here, one is a connected medical use case, and then the second is a manufacturing use case. With the connected medical use case, actually the first webinar we did earlier this year in January was between Device Authority and PTC ThingWorks, and we were talking about how to build secure connected medical devices. So once again, that webinar is recorded, it's up on our website. And I think it's another interesting intersection between how a manufacturer looks at using PKI and specifically the KeyScaler platform to inject and to manage and to control PKI implementations for its own devices as well as for its own customers. So here is a joint customer that both Thales and Device Authority have been working on that has the requirements for both. And when we went back earlier and said, it's one thing to have a door lock on a hotel being hacked, but when you're dealing with a surgical robot, of which the market is growing tremendously, there are severe real-world implications, not just from regulations, but real-world implications of what if all of a sudden, the instruction set being sent to that device was corrupted, or what if that device all of a sudden was not where it was supposed to be located. looking at these type of use cases in the enterprise scenario, there's a lot of different touch points, and then you have to add in the complexity of, everyone views IoT, and the core assumption is everything's online all the time, and in a lot of use cases that is not the case. So how do you handle the security functionality and enforce security policy in both online and offline modes? And not only that, once again, it's one thing for a manufacturer to install its own root of trust, but ultimately, how does that interplay with the requirements in the healthcare industry, whether it be in the EU or the US? So, John, we know you have a lot of healthcare expertise, and once again, that hardened root of trust is a critical thing that the healthcare industry requires.
Absolutely, and it's this environment too is tricky for many reasons, but from a security perspective, as you described, you need that assurance. You need to help assure integrity of things like instruction sets, proper authentication of devices, but yet you also have the interplay of security cannot get in the way of the delivery of care. So these things have to be done in a high assurance type of way that has built-in scenarios that anticipates all the potential issues that could happen in this area. And of course, also privacy, so much heightened awareness around the protection of private information, the need to share it in a hospital environment to get information from different devices as far as delivery of care, but at the same time protect it from places and people that it should not be going to. Keep it in the realm of folks that have a need to know or are involved in the treatment of the person. So this healthcare always being a challenging environment because of some of those things. But again, the trust level and the availability angle in particular are particularly heightened here, and another reason why that strong root of trust can give you a lot of advantages in the healthcare environment.
And this is also why we lay out the IoT enterprise security blueprint, because when a lot of product managers and project architects are trying to design a product and how it connects to an application platform, one of the things that they often run into that they didn't expect is there's not an inherent ability to create that secure trust between a particular device and the actual application. So for Device Authority, working with PTC ThingWorx, our extension allows that trust to be established, once again, in a very simple way, to eliminate that as a potential security problem. And while this is showing a medical robot, last year Trend Micro released this report. I think 90,000 industrial robots were known to have infections. And going back to a safety issue, if I can take over your industrial robots and change your product specifications by 2 millimeters and it's not caught by quality control, that is depending on industry, a huge safety impact out in the world, or a huge financial impact out in the world. That it's not a question of if it's going to happen, it's a question of when it's going to happen. And that's why we take a look at a lot of these things again in the holistic manner, is that you're dealing with manufacturers, you're dealing with your enterprise system, you're dealing with third-party applications, cloud platforms, etc. If you don't have a full blueprint in front of you of how to connect all those pieces, and then dive it back down and ask the question, how is the device trust established? And if it's not established, how can I possibly have data trust? So in this case, with the medical use case, again, going back to our blueprint, you have the robot that's sitting at the hospital. Again, it's online sometimes, offline sometimes. It should be geofenced so you know exactly where it is. It has its operating instructions coming from an application that's sitting in a cloud provider. How is that being protected? And again, this is where KeyScaler is the glue that is enabling this throughout the various portions. And then ultimately, how do you verify that wherever those instruction sets are coming from is absolutely verified? And that's where you require Thales nShield, that again is doing the root of trust, the crypto key storage, and the policy management over that. So it's an exciting use case. It's a complex use case, and as John mentioned, it's regulatory wise, safety wise, patient care wise, there's a lot of different pieces that are moving that need to be taken into consideration, but it has to start with the device trust, the data privacy and security, and how does that work at an operational scale. So while many enterprises might not be this complex, they still have the various components at an enterprise level. This is one of John's favorite examples of the Thales expertise.
So just to again kind of mirror what we were talking about before about the manufacturing process being one piece, the building of the device, and then the operations being somewhat separate. On the building side, before it was cool to call it IoT, we've been helping folks build systems like this for quite some time, injecting roots of trust, key pairs, and certificates into devices on the manufacturing line, where the HSM is right there as the component is being assembled to load something, and the manufacturer being able to build controls around that, to load one key per device and load only a certain number of devices before things stop. That protects them, especially for offshore manufacturing lines, and it also protects the customer, because when the customer gets the device, there can be an exchange that's performed with that certificate to validate the device, that it's an authentic device from the manufacturer, has a valid software load, etc. That starting point for the root of trust. One of the coolest examples we've ever done, the picture on the upper right there, is with a company called Prima Cinema. They wanted to be able to deliver first-run movies to home users. So instead of waiting the several months for it to play through the theaters and then to be able to get it through something like Netflix or Amazon, they wanted to deliver it day of, which was quite a proposition to give to a movie studio whose content is gold. But they went and relied on a root of trust embedded into their home playback players that can be used for authentication. They protected all of the streaming content, as well as applied things like invisible digital watermarks to protect the content, using an HSM as that gold standard for doing all their crypto operations. And we're able to convince the movie studios that, yes, we can protect that at the level that you're going to be comfortable with and your security evaluators will be comfortable with. The nickname I've seen for this company in the press is Netflix for millionaires. So this is a fairly costly home theater device, not something that I would find in my basement, that's for sure. But it was the unlocking of a business model by establishing the highest level of trust for content. And I think on the operations side, we talked a lot already, Adam and I, about some of the issues here, but really the idea of broadening the connectivity of manufacturing environments, sharing that data more widely for the purpose of analyzing it. Clearly going to be a hybrid model. Some data will be analyzed locally and support local decision making. You get a leak or you get a fault that you need to address immediately. You don't need to go to the cloud to get that answer. You act on it right away. But then there'll also be this aspect of sharing data across multiple plants to the cloud. So now operational data can be compared across multiple sites, and a company can use that to improve their operations across those. So that's really the power that a full IoT scale project can bring.
And I think that goes back to what we've seen over the past year is a lot of IoT projects started off as POCs for people to determine what they were trying to develop, how it was going to play out, and now we're seeing a good majority of those POCs going into operational mode, and that's part of why we wanted to have these webinar series. Is as it goes from a lab POC into an operational design, a lot of different things come into play. And so when that occurs, that's when you need to ensure that you understand again some of the basic components, and ultimately as we look at it, it goes back to that device trust and the data trust and how to manage that at an operational scale. And the IoT, device lifecycle management is really something that needs to be mapped out, for any particular deployment, especially in those critical care industries. The PKI, I mean, it solves a lot of the issues. Unfortunately, inherently, PKI is a beast to manage, and we've spoken to a lot of industries out there that they took a look at using PKI for device identity and integrity, but they figured they couldn't manage it. And so that's where the KeyScaler automation platform comes into play to remove that barrier. Additionally, what we're seeing now is enterprises that have multiple departments, multiple divisions, that each one kind of had its own PKI strategy in the past, either due to compliance or other factors. They're now looking to streamline what is their enterprise PKI vision. What is their root of trust that they're going to be using, and where is that going to be managed and stored, and then ultimately how many different pieces are that is that going to touch? As John referred to that Poneman Institute study, organizations are looking to attach more applications and more devices to their PKI infrastructure, and that requires, once again, an integrated solution such as KeyScaler and the Thales HSM. There has to be a seamless integration between the device, the data, and how the humans interact with it. And I think we've seen that in various implementations where, once again, getting data from a device, making sure you can trust that data, it's going to go be analyzed, but while it's waiting to be analyzed, it has to be stored, and that can be controlled and protected using the Thales Volumetric line. And so it's that automation across that, once again, removes that barrier to entry from the security angle, but then also ticks off all the things that a compliance or risk management office would need, from audit trails, audit logs of what was deployed with what security policy, what data was being transported, where it was being stored and secured with respect to GDPR and other things. Ultimately, there are no, there are no simple to deploy IoT projects that we're aware of. But hopefully what we've demonstrated during this webinar is both Device Authority and Thales, we have a lot of operational experience in these realms, for good and for bad. We've seen things that work, we've seen things that fail, and we've jointly run into customers with questions where it required a big whiteboard session to kind of figure out how to make it work. Once again, that online offline mode where different actors have to have different access to different pieces of data, and it all has to be secured with strong root of trust. So we'd definitely like to be used as a reference. Obviously, we're in business to sell products and make money, but at this stage of the IoT industry, it's an ecosystem and it's a collaborative effort. So we're happy to get on phone calls, folks, to not only discuss what's happened in our experience, but to help walk through various portions of that IoT enterprise security blueprint and bring in our ecosystem partners. And Thales as well has a large group of ecosystem partners worldwide that have done everything from not only the healthcare deployments, but the payment devices and all other things that require, once again, that strong root of trust to do the device trust and that data security up and down the chain. So with that being stated, we have an offer up on the screen here. Once again, you can always call and talk to us. We'd be happy to engage into specialized offers for POCs. We do have links there for our Enterprise IoT Security Guide, as well as we do have a Thales and Device Authority Healthcare Solution Brief. Both Thales and Device Authority are going to be in attendance at the upcoming HIM show in Vegas in March. So if anyone's going to be out there and wants to come and talk, we'd be happy to arrange one-on-one sessions and answer all your questions. So Rosa, I think we're almost up on the time. So if there's a question for John or myself, I think you can start off with John. And if that takes up the time, it's awesome.
Thank you, Adam, and also thank you, John. Yeah, so I'm just going to quickly open up for Q&A. So if you haven't submitted your question already, then please do so now. I've got one that came through at the beginning, maybe one that John can answer. So I've got a question about where does blockchain fit into the overall strategy for addressing IoT security?
Sure. Blockchain is the hottest topic out there, I would have to say. Definitely a lot of potential when you look at its application into IoT, especially for something like distributed identity validations. You know, we talked a little bit on this webinar about some of the traditional struggles of PKI. I think we talked about revocation, maybe a couple other things. The centralized model of validating an identity is one of the things that can be troublesome there. And in an environment like the IoT, the ability to do that in a more distributed fashion based on reputation is a powerful concept, and certainly appears to be one where blockchain could help address some of those issues. Interestingly, in our Ponemon study, we are seeing folks relying on HSMs, even in these early days of blockchain, to do the crypto operations that are core to creating the transactions in a blockchain. We've had a few instances already of people creating wallets and implementing various parts of blockchain inside an HSM. Again, kind of underscoring what we talked about here of creating that trust foundation by doing the crypto that makes it all up, or that is central to it in a very highly secure and protected place when you need a great deal of trust, such as blockchain. So definitely see great potential there.
Well, I would add to that, because again, you know, like every other hot topic, it has to be discussed everywhere. And going back to the Microsoft event, you know, earlier this week, you know, they were specifically talking about what Microsoft is doing with blockchain, and I think the highlight was realizing that blockchain it's an interesting framework. It has some specific immediate use cases, most people related to the Bitcoin, et cetera, but doing secure contracts, secure ledgers, it's all something, you know, that's out there. But the ultimate takeaway is blockchain has a long way to go from being enterprise ready, because it was never designed to work in an enterprise. And so that's where I think Microsoft and some of the other players, once again, are trying to build foundational building blocks to make blockchain useful. And in fact, for Device Authority, we have a blog post up on, you know, how we make blockchain IoT ready. So I would encourage folks to go download that and to read that, because that's another thing where obviously we get hit with that question a lot ourselves. And you know, going back into this whole IoT lifecycle management, you know, what's mature, what's not mature, and that's where PKI is great because it's mature. HSMs are great because they're very mature. Our KeyScaler platform is more mature than most. But when evaluating everything, you know, who is going to put their corporate job on the line using a non-proven technology at a scale or for a use case that it wasn't intended to be used for? So that's the cautionary tale that I would say from, you know, being around the software startup world here in Silicon Valley for a lot of years, that ultimately when you're building a solution, you better make sure it's rock solid, because if the company's going to invest into it, they want to make sure that they're going to have a return on investment, and they understand how that project's going to be supported, not just at inception, but, you know, in evolution. So Rosa, I think that brings us up to the hour, and I believe, as is your custom, all other questions that we didn't get to, you will type them up and post them out.
Correct. We have actually got a couple more questions, so we'll answer them individually, sort of next 24 hours or so. So yeah, thanks Adam, and thanks John. Really, really good webinar. And thank you everyone that's tuned in. If you've got any other questions, then please, you know, send them over. And we look forward to engaging with you further in the future.
Thank you, Rosa.
Thank you all.